The sterile helipad baked under the sun, the massive Phoenix 1 was motionless, critical light flashing. CEO Sloan Sterling watched the $50 billion meeting clock tick. "Not safe to fly," Captain Miles reported. The manager confirmed the part was unavailable, requiring massive delay. Mechanic Elias Vance watched from the perimeter. Furious, Sloan demanded, "I pay for solutions, not delays. Get this fixed now." Elias requested 5 minutes for a check. Sloan dismissed him. "No time for guesswork. Follow protocol." The rotor head violently shivered, an uncommanded tremor. "Abort! Physical failure detected." All eyes snapped to the quiet mechanic they had just dismissed. Elias Vance, 35, was a civilian helicopter mechanic specializing in heavy lift platforms and complex mechanical diagnostics. He carried a quiet dignity and the indelible smell of aviation grease, a scent of honest work that stood in stark contrast to the sterile, high-gloss environment of the Sterling Dynamics helipad. Elias's current life was a meticulously constructed fortress of predictability. Defined shifts that ended precisely at 3:00 p.m., ensuring he was home every afternoon by 3:30 p.m. for school pickup. This schedule was his sacred promise as a single father to his daughter Maya. Maya, now 6, often sat in a cordoned-off safety area of the vast hangar, quietly studying or drawing. She associated the metallic scent of the workspace with the comforting, reliable presence of her father. She had learned to find profound peace in the rhythmic clang and whir of heavy machinery, the predictable chaos of the hangar floor. 6 years ago, Elias was not a floor mechanic. He was Elias Vance, R&D lead engineer on the military's high-tech Taurus heavy lift project, the very design foundation upon which Sloan Sterling's Phoenix 1 was based. He was a decorated high-level aerospace designer, holding multiple patents on complex transmission and rotor synchronization systems. His world was prestige, high-level security clearances, and the relentless pressure of constant innovation. Then came the shattering, abrupt silence. His wife, Sarah, was killed in a civilian traffic accident. The tragedy was traced back to sheer corporate negligence. A confidential internal report, which Elias later saw, confirmed that the transport company had consciously prioritized a cheap, unverified Chinese alloy over the certified titanium alloy Elias himself had mandated in the Taurus project. The material substitution, driven purely by a desire for a 2% margin increase, led directly to a catastrophic structural failure on the commuter line Sarah had been using. The failure was a direct result of a profit-driven substitution, a fact that decimated his faith in high-stakes engineering where balance sheets eclipsed safety. His own professional mantra had always been absolute integrity, regardless of cost. To see that foundational principle casually violated in the civilian world, leading to his wife's death, broke him completely. The intensity of his former life, the 3 a.m. crisis calls, the missed family moments, the relentless pursuit of perfection in a world that allowed civilian failure, became unbearable. He didn't just resign, he abandoned the pursuit of the next patent, the next promotion, the next billion-dollar project. He chose the tangible, simple work of fixing existing machines over the abstract, stressful work of designing revolutionary ones. He sought the truth found only on the hangar floor, where grease and metal spoke louder than titles and balance sheets. He craved the moral clarity that came with diagnosing a problem he could touch, not one buried in layers of corporate liability reports. He understood that the floor was where the truth lived, and he chose that truth over power. His simple life with Maya was his atonement, his fortress against the moral decay he had witnessed. Sloan Sterling, 42, CEO of Sterling Dynamics, was the apotheosis of corporate ambition and Elias's professional opposite. She was a self-made billionaire, known for her brutal, surgical efficiency and a zero-tolerance policy for failure or delay. Sloan had clawed her way to the top by being faster, sharper, and more ruthless than anyone else. She saw delay as existential weakness and risk as unpardonable incompetence. Her current acquisition deal was the final push to guarantee her firm a global monopoly, a $50 billion win. The Phoenix 1 was her personal totem, meticulously maintained and flawlessly fast. Less a means of transport and more a symbol of her absolute, unwavering power and her ability to control time and space. Her top-tier maintenance team, clad in immaculate starched white uniforms, operated under a constant state of pressure and fear. They were perpetual firefighters, expected to manage problems through digital diagnostics and quick-fix protocol, not deep mechanical analysis. They knew Elias, the floor mechanic, only for his surgical efficiency and his profound, unnerving silence. He avoided all management meetings, technical reports, and corporate politics, famous for his belief that true knowledge resided in the hands and the ears, not in algorithm reports or PowerPoint decks. His refusal to engage in corporate life was misinterpreted as mere social ineptitude. The executives in their expensive suits and the technicians in their pristine uniforms all operated under the assumption that the most valuable information came from the most expensive screens, never from the man with the dirty fingernails. The technical crew were already sweating the pressure, their anxiety palpable. Elias, retreating from Sloane's cold financial dismissal, felt a gentle, grounding tug on his sleeve. "Daddy," Maya whispered, looking up at the massive, expensive machine, her eyes wide with a child's faith. "Can you fix the big bird? It looks scared." Elias knelt, adjusting her jacket. "I know the bird, sweetie. I know every wire and every gear. I know its heart," he murmured, his gaze sweeping over the high-tech cockpit with an intimacy the pilot could never match. But sometimes they don't want the right answer if it doesn't fit their schedule. The maintenance manager, Richard, sighed heavily, picking up the phone to call for expensive external consultants. The idea that a floor mechanic, a man whose skills were considered beneath digital management, could possess the answer that stumped their billion-dollar diagnostic system was simply unthinkable. The true solution was standing right next to them, holding his daughter's hand, waiting for the system to fail. The fault code for the main transmission actuator, code 77, actuator communication intermittent, was the digital team's worst nightmare. The error was chaotic, flashing red for 30 seconds, disappearing entirely, and then returning with critical urgency. The confusing signals sent the advanced diagnostic systems into a loop, perpetually demanding a component replacement. Richard, the manager, knew the specialized part. Flown from Germany, would take a non-negotiable 12 hours to arrive. Inside the cockpit, the veteran pilot, Captain Miles, a man whose calm was forged over decades of military ops and high-risk extraction missions, stood his ground. He flatly refused to lift off, citing the catastrophic immediate risk of a transmission failure at altitude. "The digital twin says it's fine for low-speed taxiing," Miles reported, his voice tight and controlled, a wire pulled taut. "But the intermittent nature of the error suggests a physical break in the feedback loop, not a software glitch. Digital redundancy is great, but physics is final. My gut says this is deadly. That flickering light is a symptom, not the core disease." His refusal was absolute, placing professional ethics above corporate mandates. Sloane watched the clock relentlessly. The deadline for her final, advantageous offer was rapidly approaching. Her rival bidder, the formidable Marcus Thorne, was already airborne, closing in on the target firm's headquarters. She saw Miles's caution as outright insubordination, her face now dominating a large wall-mounted security monitor in the executive lounge was a mask of cold, implacable fury. She demanded immediate, actionable solutions. "I need a functional bird or a functional plan B in 60 seconds. Richard, quantify the cost of this incompetence per minute. The delay has already cost us $12 million in market confidence." Richard, sweating profusely, proposed diverting a fixed-wing jet to a commercial airport, but the ground transfer, security clearance, and subsequent flight would add 2 critical, deal-breaking hours. Every proposed solution introduced a fatal delay, guaranteeing Marcus Thorne would swoop in and steal the early negotiation advantage. The opportunity cost was staggering, calculated in millions of dollars for every tick of the clock. Elias, who had only moved 20 feet away, ostensibly packing his small toolbox, paused his exit. Years of military flight test and R&D experience had honed his hearing to an unnatural level of fidelity. He closed his eyes, filtering out the shrieking management voices and the distant traffic noise. What he heard was a subtle, sharp zzzt, zzzt, the sound of metal surfaces vibrating just out of perfect synchronization, momentarily slipping before snapping back into place. It was the frantic tremor of a system fighting itself. He heard what the expensive digital sensors and the nervous, white-uniformed executives completely missed. A minute, persistent microshift in the rotor balance. It was a barely audible, high-frequency chatter, a specific resonant frequency at precisely 1200 hertz, signaling deep structural fatigue, not electronic component failure. The Phoenix One's diagnostics were programmed only to look for errors in the actuator's voltage and communication, not for external forces acting on the actuator. The system was blind to physics. Elias confirmed his sonic diagnosis using his personal, modified vibration reader, a simple, custom-calibrated analog device he trusted implicitly. The simple needle on his device swung wildly, confirming the 1200 hertz frequency, a reading the multi-million-dollar system couldn't process. He then keyed a shared, low-power maintenance frequency to contact Captain Miles directly, bypassing the panicking management entirely. "Captain, I hear a chatter at 1200 hertz. It's not the actuator, it's a physical preload issue on the primary drive frame. The actuator is compensating for a structural displacement. I need a quick, invasive physical test using my personal diagnostics kit to confirm the displacement." Richard, realizing the floor mechanic had contacted the pilot directly, lunged for the radio console, his face red with bureaucratic panic. "Absolutely not. This violates 5 levels of protocol, Vance. You are a general floor technician. Step away from the aircraft immediately. You are not certified to interfere with an executive launch procedure." The corporate fear of protocol breach was greater than the fear of physical disaster. Richard's entire identity was wrapped up in the digital management system. Admitting a mechanic's ears could outperform their algorithms would dismantle his career. He fought for the procedure, not the truth. Maya, sensing the rising hostility directed at her father, squeezed his hand tighter, her small act of loyalty a potent anchor. Elias's resolve hardened. He could not teach his daughter to back down from the truth, especially when lives were on the line. He whispered, "It's okay, sweetie. Dad knows what he's doing. Just watch the big bird." Sloan watched the clock relentlessly. Under Sloan's furious insistence that the light must be cleared, Richard, desperate to appease his CEO, panicked and ordered a full system reboot. This manual override was an attempt to silence the warning by forcing a recalibration against the pilot's grave concerns, a disastrous move designed only to buy a few minutes of plausible deniability. As the reboot began, attempting to recalibrate the system against the physical failure, the high-frequency chatter intensified exponentially. The physical failure was actively fighting the electronic patch, amplifying the torque and stress. The massive rotor head began to shake violently, shuddering worse than before, the sound now a sickening, grinding moan. The immense corporate pressure and the demand for a quick, digital solution had forced the team into a fatal mistake. The helicopter was now rapidly shaking itself apart, seconds from catastrophic structural damage. Elias saw the violent, destructive shudder and recognized the point of no return. The metal was screaming. He didn't waste another second asking for permission or adhering to protocol. He vaulted the final safety barrier, moving with a speed that belied his calm demeanor, ignoring Richard's high-pitched, frantic shouts of, "Security! Stop him!" He didn't touch the controls. Instead, he grabbed Richard's headset, his voice, though low, cutting through the panic and the sirens with absolute, undeniable authority. "Stop the reboot! You are destroying the coupling. The failure isn't the component, Richard. It's the micro-displacement of the primary drive frame mount, specifically the Taurus Class 4 titanium joint. I know this failure mode. I am the man who designed the original frame 6 years ago." Twist 1. The lingering truth of the designer. The entire helipad, including Sloan's security monitor, froze in shocked silence. The technicians in their pristine uniforms stopped dead. The man they had just tried to physically restrain, the quiet, grease-stained floor mechanic, was revealed to be Elias Vance, former Taurus project lead engineer, co-patent holder on the very transmission system, the progenitor of the technology currently threatening their lives. His sudden, absolute command, the authority derived from creation, not money, silenced the screaming sirens and the frantic management. He was the only person alive who understood the minute, cumulative stress points on this specific legacy prototype airframe and its specific metallurgical properties. His immediate diagnosis was instant and terrifyingly accurate. The error was caused by a specific thermal stress point in the titanium alloy. This stress point, developing over years of high-G maneuvers, Sloan's typical flight style, caused a molecular shift in the material's crystalline structure. This resulted in a 200 micrometer deflection in the frame mount when the system reached full operating temperature. A displacement invisible to the naked eye, yet completely catastrophic at 500 RPM. The component was fine. The entire structure was flexing just enough to pull the actuator completely out of its safe tolerance. The computer read actuator failure because the physical distortion made the actuator look faulty, an example of perfect programming failing to account for material degradation outside the scope of its sensors. Elias spoke directly to Sloan, who had rushed out of the cabin, horrified, now standing on the tarmac, and Captain Miles, cutting through the complex jargon and simplifying the critical physics problem. The frame mount has a thermal shear point. It shifts 200 micrometers under full load. The sensor reads that shift as component failure. A replacement part won't fix the frame. This is a preload calibration issue, not a component swap. You need to adjust the preload, not replace the part. Now, he did not beg, he commanded. Sloan, recognizing the name Taurus from old expensive security briefings she dimly remembered, and seeing the cold focus, life-or-death command in Elias's eyes, felt her corporate facade crumble. Her panic ceded to a desperate, primal trust. You have 5 minutes, Vance, 5 minutes to save this deal, and our lives. Elias did not acknowledge her timeline. He moved straight to the work. He didn't replace a single component. He retrieved a custom-made specialized torque wrench from the secret compartment of his personal kit. A wrench calibrated only for the feel of the specific titanium alloy he knew so intimately. He slowly and deliberately began adjusting 2 tiny, almost imperceptible tensioning bolts on the frame mount, which secured the titanium joint to the main airframe spine. His movement was slow, deliberate, and deeply respectful of the machine, a complete contrast to the earlier panic. He was listening to the metal, feeling the required tension. His eyes were not on the console. They were on the metal itself, watching for the subtle cessation of the 1200 hertz chatter. He slowly, surgically realigned the 200 micrometer micro displacement. The effect was instantaneous. The grinding stopped. The shudder ceased. The massive rotor head, which had been fighting itself, settled into a perfect, silent gyroscopic balance. The fault light immediately snapped to a solid, reassuring green. Captain Miles, staring wide-eyed at the console, confirmed the diagnostics to the headquarters. All parameters nominal, 0 vibration, smoother than the factory floor. The issue is resolved. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the gentle, steady, perfectly balanced hum of the powerful engine. Elias Vance simply put his custom wrench away and wiped the grease from his brow. Twist 2. The emotional repayment of dignity. Sloan was utterly speechless, her power and wealth rendered instantly moot. She looked at the filthy uniform, then at the man who had just saved her $50 billion deal and her life with 3 minutes of quiet, unappreciated genius. Vance, she said, her voice strained, brittle, and stripped of its CEO authority. If you knew the solution, if you were the designer, why did you wait? Why didn't you step forward immediately when the alarm first sounded? Elias met her gaze, the quiet devastation in his eyes profound. He didn't raise his voice, but the low tone carried the undeniable, earth-shaking weight of his entire philosophy. Madam, I asked for 5 minutes when the light first flickered. You told me you didn't have time for guesses. You ordered a structural component to be replaced without a physical inspection, based on a protocol designed by people who never touch the metal. You dismissed me because of my shirt. He paused, letting the truth burn into her. No one listens to quiet people or people with grease on their uniform, especially not here, where titles matter more than truth. I only acted when your panic endangered the pilot and the lives of those around us, including my daughter, who was standing right there. Sloane froze, the raw truth of his statement, her own casual, arrogant dismissiveness, hitting her like a physical blow. She realized her entire corporate culture was a machine built on prioritizing status, speed, and digital data over competence, patience, and human expertise. She had almost died because she valued a white starched uniform over a dirty, experienced one. The immense power she held, the wealth, the name, the control, vanished. The only authority left standing belonged to the single dad mechanic who knew the truth of the machine. The power balance had violently, irrevocably shifted. The intense electric tension evaporated, replaced by a strange, heavy introspection that settled over the sterile helipad. The veteran pilot, Captain Miles, was the first to act, stepping off the aircraft. He walked directly to Elias and publicly shook his hand with profound respect, his gratitude genuine and loud enough for every executive to hear. Elias, you didn't just save the bird, you saved our lives. The diagnostic screens lied. Your ears and your hands told the truth. Thank you. We were minutes from a catastrophic failure, and your expertise was better than our $1 million system. Richard, the maintenance manager, and the white uniform team looked on, their expressions mingling shame, fear, and a dawning, reluctant respect. They had chased the digital ghost and almost caused a tragedy, while the real solution was an analog truth they had ignored. No one could meet Elias's gaze. The power of his quiet refusal to be corrupted by the corporate rush had just been validated by a near-death experience. Sloane, completely undone, walked directly to Elias. Her expensive suit looked painfully out of place next to his worn, authentic gear. Her apology was not an executive order, but a broken, honest confession, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. Vance, my conduct was inexcusable, both today and historically. I apologize for my arrogance, my contempt, and for creating a system that forces brilliant people into silence. I need to know, you were the Taurus project lead. Why the hangar floor, Elias? Why abandon everything for this life? Elias pointed to Maya, who was watching from the edge of the hangar with a shy but proud expression. My wife passed 6 years ago, Stella. The high life, the 3 a.m. crisis calls, the relentless pursuit of the next prototype, the constant demand of a multi-billion-dollar machine. It meant missed birthdays, endless travel, and a machine that was always first. This life puts her first. This is my choice, not my punishment. I traded prestige for presence. It was the best exchange I've ever made. The only thing more important than knowing how to build a machine is knowing how to be there for a person. Sloane's mind raced, a terrifying calculation of cost and value taking place inside her head. The $50 billion acquisition now felt like petty cash compared to the realization she had nearly thrown away her life and her entire future over 3 minutes of perceived delay. How many other Vances had she dismissed? How many quiet warnings, buried under layers of her own corporate architecture, had she ignored? The truth was bitter. She didn't run a company of experts. She ran a company of yes-men programmed to follow protocol, not physics. Elias hadn't just fixed the helicopter. He had exposed the fundamental instability of her leadership foundation. Sloane's corporate rigidity shattered completely. She personally ensured Maya was brought into the protected, climate-controlled executive lounge. She knelt, abandoning all pretense of corporate distance, and spoke to Maya directly. Maya, your father is the bravest, smartest man I have ever met. He just saved all of our lives. She offered the little girl a bottle of water and a brand new expensive drawing pad, a small human gesture that broke the ice. The atmosphere shifted entirely. The speed, the tension, and the corporate terror were gone, replaced by a profound, genuine recognition of a single father's sacrifice and expertise. Sloan made a firm, irrevocable decision. Despite the lingering financial pressure of the acquisition deal, she refused to rush Captain Miles' final, extended pre-flight check. Safety, now that she viscerally understood the true risk of failure, was paramount. Watching Elias gently reassure his daughter, helping her set up her new drawing pad, Sloan looked back at the glass tower that housed her office, her fortress. She realized she had built her entire success by rejecting and dismissing human input, only to be brought to the brink of disaster by ignoring the single most competent person in her field. She deeply questioned the value of her own ambition if it required her to treat people as disposable commodities. She realized that the deepest flaws in her company were not mechanical, but systemic, rooted entirely in her own leadership style, which worshipped results over process and ignored the wisdom of the hands-on expert. The Phoenix 1 finally lifted off, its perfectly balanced blades slicing the midday air with a smooth, silent, powerful whoosh. Sloan had rescheduled her acquisition meeting, recognizing that the emotional and human drama had irrevocably reset her professional priorities. The successful liftoff was no longer a sign of her power, but a quiet, powerful symbol of the integrity that Elias Vance represented. An hour later, Elias was formally summoned to her panoramic executive office overlooking the city. Sloan, now dressed in simpler, less aggressive business attire, offered him a massive role: Chief Engineering Integrity and Human Systems Liaison. The offer included a flexible schedule tailored exactly to Maya's life, a salary designed to tempt him back to the elite, and a seat on the executive safety board. "Elias," she said, her voice sincere, "I'm not trying to buy you. I'm trying to buy the truth. I need someone who won't lie to me about the metal because they're afraid of the money." Elias gently and firmly refused the title and the high salary. He stepped away from the window, his resolve unshakable. "Madam, I value my time with Maya more than any title you can offer. I have stability now. I only ask for one compensation, one condition: the right for any technician on the hangar floor, regardless of rank or uniform, to speak directly to the pilot or the executive safety team if they identify a critical safety flaw. I want to know that quiet people will be listened to. I want the system to protect the truth, not the hierarchy." Sloan didn't argue. She realized Elias was refusing power not out of fear, but out of a deeper, more profound integrity. He was demanding a cultural change, not a contract. She accepted his condition instantly, recognizing the true vulnerability of her company was the rigid communication barrier she had fostered. She immediately restructured her entire maintenance hierarchy and executive safety oversight, creating the Elias Vance Safety Charter. This was a formal, documented policy and a mandatory yearly training module for all executives, guaranteeing direct, anonymous, and protected reporting lines for all lower-tier technicians on safety matters. The policy stated that all quiet voices must be heard, with a specific, severe penalty for any manager who suppressed a safety warning from below. Richard was not fired but demoted, his salary cut, making it clear that overriding a pilot's safety call was a career-ending error. The charter became Sloan's personal penance and her professional legacy. She spent the next 6 months ruthlessly pruning the layers of management that had stifled accountability, replacing expensive diagnostic contracts with a new emphasis on mentorship and floor-level expertise. She began requiring all incoming R&D engineers to spend at least 1 week per quarter on the maintenance floor, with grease on their hands, listening to the machines and reporting only on what they felt and heard. This policy shift wasn't driven by profit. It was driven by the fear of repeating her near-fatal mistake and a genuine desire to honor the man who refused to be bought. Maya was now a welcome and frequent presence at the hangar, her safety spot upgraded to a small, bright office next to the captain's lounge. Elias knew his values were honored and enshrined into policy. He, the humble mechanic, refused the temptation of power and money, proving that his family-first commitment was absolute, his integrity unshakable. Sloan Sterling, the ruthless CEO, learned that her true power lay not in her command, but in her capacity to listen, to respect expertise regardless of status, and to value human life over a deadline. A single, small technical crisis had changed the safety culture of an entire multi-billion-dollar corporation, proving irrevocably that true leadership always listens to the quiet voices on the floor. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to Single Dad Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.